Somewhere, lost in time and space, is a briefcase that has never existed. It is filled with confidential documents no one has ever seen, pertaining to what? No one knows. But one thing is clear, my grandfather wants someone to fetch it from his house and bring it to him in the loony bin. This is precisely why he is in the loony bin. He has become obsessed with doing things that are impossible. But after watching my mom spend the last 4 hours of her Saturday actually looking for it, I'm thinking of putting her in there with him. I tried to talk her out of it, but she's out to prove a point to a very dull edge. She has been since he moved into the loony bin. And watching her depresses me so much, I'm actually compelled to follow. So we go over to his house, room by abandoned room, until eventually I find the only briefcase left, and I present it to my mom. I open it very slowly to show the 30 or so ancient issues of National Geographic shoved inside. I want to prove to her that her father is insane, but Mom doesn't say a word. She just obediently carries it back to him in the loony bin anyway. I want to show him what's real, she eventually says, but she can tell from my expression that I don't buy it, so she tries another. He needs to see how I spent my day off because of him, but I know what's really going on here. She's hoping that this is the piece of evidence that will finally bring their realities back on course. But the problem is that's her insanity, because they never were. By the time she's got back to the loony bin, he's watching football in the common area. He's forgotten that he ever asked for it. "Why'd you bring me this pile of junk?" he asks, and then laughs without listening when she tries to explain. I've seen this cycle hundreds upon hundreds of occasions, but it only recently had a scientific name. My grandfather has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. The neurologist said he's probably had the disease for 10 or more years now, but he was always so good-naturedly and competent in managing his own life that he just threw us off the scent. See, for half my life, my grandfather has referred to me by my dog's name, and my uncle by my own. But even before that, way back into the 50s, back when he was just a young sailor stationed in Guam, he was famous for getting drunk and climbing palm trees. And because of the couple of times he was able to actually climb down again and then get into his car without hurting himself, he became famous for being bailed out of jail at 2 in the morning by his wife, with my mother in tow. In the 1960s, he forgot to pick up the kids from school for 6 hours. In 1992, he insisted on walking my mom's golden retriever on a busy street, and it bolted into traffic. And 2004 started when he set the microwave on fire after microwaving a cookie for 15 minutes instead of seconds. But I dare you, bring up any of these examples. Hell, bring up all of these examples, and two things are going to happen. He'll laugh without acknowledgement, and somewhere nearby, my mother will be shaking her head. She'll be filling in the other half of the story, the time she had to walk home in the rain, or rush the dog to the vet, or woke up to a phone call from the fire department. And with that kind of track record, Mom might have never had him tested at all for Alzheimer's if he hadn't forgotten who she was for a couple of hours. And see, no one likes to be forgotten, so off to the loony bin he went. But he loves the loony bin. He never has to clean up after himself or remember what medications he's supposed to take. And the food is served hot and on the regular, just the way he likes it. Cannery cookery processed, baby food soft, with a medley, if you will, on every plate, containing salt and sweet, the two flavors he can still identify besides Tabasco. And best of all, there's other old sailors wandering all over the place, and they sit for hours talking about the good old days, ports of call, and who they gave gonorrhea to where. And then overnight, they forget it ever happened, and they get to see the whole show start over again the following day. At least once a week, there's a big to-do the Loony Bin staff throw, such as the seniors' luau, complete with hula dancing lessons. And he calls to tell my mom about it every night after he tuckers himself out. He makes it sound like a cruise ship that goes nowhere. See, he's fine. It's Mom I'm worried about. She's become a single parent all over again, except for the first time around, the kid actually could grow up. She's agonized over putting my grandfather in the Loony Bin for so long now that he's finally there. She spends most of her free time with him out of guilt. And this included most of her 59th birthday, where the first words out of her mouth to him as she opened the door were, "Hey, do you know what day it is?" This is a trademark gesture of my mom's that only I recognize, and it kills me. It's like she's asked so little of life, the remembrance of a birthday, the pat on the head, that life is obligated to disappoint her. What she wants to hear can only be heard in the same dimension where my grandfather's briefcase actually exists. And so because of this, it just sounds like the setup to a particularly ugly joke. And sure enough, he obliges. He thinks about her question for a moment with his mouth open, as is his custom. And he says, "Happy Halloween!" So when Mom isn't at the Loony Bin or at work, she's over at my grandfather's house. And if there is one mercy, the house has removed all doubts that the Loony Bin is exactly where he belongs. The depth of his insanity reveals itself with every can of roach spray we find stashed in a plate cupboard or open bottle of Drano left open besides drinking water. She tried to intervene before it reached this point, but he fought her over every expired coupon and every broken pair of glasses she tried to throw out. And eventually Mom graduated to threats, but oh, this just turned him sly. So he took to cramming the twisty ties he'd stolen from the grocery store into drawers and hoarding his newspapers in the closets. So once they were discovered, she asked him, "Is this some sort of game?" And he giggled like a little kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Exactly like a little kid, in fact, except you can't send an 86-year-old man to his room. You can't even force your way in to clean it. So once he was finally ejected from the house and safely lodged in the Loony Bin, she had herself a list 2 pages long of all the repairs she wanted to do, renovations that were years in the making. And when she finally had her chance, something else had tied her hands. She started herself out on a Saturday morning in what was her parents' family room, and by noon, a few cookie tins crammed with broken pencils and dried-out pens had made their way into the trash. And by 2, she'd sorted through some piles of clippings dating back to the 80s that had been mixed seamlessly with irreplaceable family photos. And then the sight of hundreds more such treasures just broke her spirits, forcing her to retreat back to her black couch with her black dog and her bottle of pink wine until Monday could take her back to her regular job. Sometimes on that couch, she'll watch the Comedy Channel, but it's mostly horror movies these days. She says, "They're the only thing that resembles my life." But there's no relief for her in ignoring the problem either. I can tell the house is on her mind even when she's watching the goriest horror show. It's mocking her like the sight of someone in a coffin that's impossibly small to contain their presence in real life, but it's doing it all the same. You see, the family room was an add-on. It was built with her and her brother back when they were teenagers and they had a relationship, back when my grandmother was at hand to supervise them and capable of taking the burden of misbehaving men off her shoulders. Those were better days, and they are not coming back. So the house must be restored. It has become metaphor. When I go over to help her, I choose to focus on my grandfather's den. And the last time I was over there, it's the belly of the beast. This was his private chamber when he was married, and it was his base of operations once he was widowed. The photographs and the plaques that line the walls from his Navy days are like a timeline of where he's going to travel back to as his mind slowly dies, Fiji, Hawaii, Guam. It's like a vacation in reverse. And I think it's the total opposite of the hell my mother's going to remember as she goes through that process herself if the disease ever strikes her. The thankless years spent emptying out an old man's icebox and trying to clip his toenails. The thought has actually softened me on her refusal to quit smoking, though, because I don't know if I want to find out if I can do for her what she does for him. And that is the lesson my grandfather never taught. We all might inherit the disease. We all might wind up in the loony bin eventually. But only my grandfather has perfected the lie of the mind. He can take responsibility for nothing, and he is the only truly happy family member I've ever known. So I quit his house, and I go to watch movies with my mom until the infomercials replace them. There is no justice in this world, she says, when it's time to go to bed. But then the phone rings. It's my grandfather. He wants to tell her about how today in the loony bin, he danced the jitterbug. Thank you.